meeting to order of the Carson City Utility Financial Oversight Committee. It's 1 o'clock. We are meeting in the Sierra Room of the Community Center. And could we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Engelman.
Here.
Member Bennett.
Here.
Member Bowling.
Here.
Member Scott.
Here.
Member Spell.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Mike Spell is new to the committee. I'd like him to take a couple of minutes to just introduce himself, and so everybody can meet him.
Hi, I'm a longtime resident of Carson City. Apparently I was requested to do this job because of my background. I have worked for the Legislative Audit Division for 21 years, and our responsibilities were not just doing financial audits, but we did mostly performance audits of all governmental entities, including for the state, and when directed, we would also do audits of the university system. We did an audit of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, and situations like that. So hopefully I can bring some good expertise as far as some of the financial ends of this, and some being also a resident in a community that is very, seems to me very concerned about water rates. Hopefully this will work out to be a really interesting meeting or committee to be on. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And staff, would you please introduce yourselves?
Danny Rotter, Engineering Manager, Public Works.
David Bruchetta, Utility Manager, Public Works.
Great, thank you. We now have, you'll see all through the agenda, people, we have public comment. We certainly want to hear from everyone. Every item will have public comment, including the election of the chairman and the vice chairman. So if there's something else you want to say to the committee that doesn't fall under any of the items on the agenda, now would be the time to do it. Okay. There doesn't seem to be any public comment, so now we need a motion to adopt the agenda as is.
So moved.
Motion from Mr. West and a second from Bruce Scott. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay, now we have the minutes, and we need to approve the minutes. On this issue, both Mr. Spell and Mr. West will be...
Sorry.
Bennett. Bennett. God. Mr. Bennett, when did you change your name?
Yesterday, I did.
And Mr. Bennett will be abstaining since they were not here at the time that we had this meeting. So, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
Chairperson Engelman, the minutes of June 3rd, 2014 are very fresh in my mind, and I would recommend that we approve those as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Bowling. And so, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All against, say nay. No nays. It's unanimous with an abstention. Kathy, you noted those abstentions? Okay, great. Thank you. Now it's time to elect a chair and a vice chair, since the DA's office, and I notice he's not here, decided that since my term ended December 31st, even though I was reappointed by Karen Abowd, that we have to do the election all over again. Do you want to handle that, Dave?
Sure. Joe would normally do that, so do I just call for?
You would first call for nominations, and we have a first and a second, and then we can vote on that, or we can see if there's any further nominations. But
Okay.
okay.
So do we have a call for a nomination for the chair, Mr. Scott?
Yes, Mr. Bruchetta, I would nominate Andy Engelman for chairperson again. She doesn't have much experience at this since we meet so infrequently, and I think we should give her another term. Thank you.
So
I would second that nomination.
So we have a first and a second for Ms. Engelman. We do a vote. Everyone in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No, so everyone votes in favor.
Right.
Ms. Engelmann is the chair.
Thank you very much. Now we have to have a vice chairman because our vice chairman got overworked by his boss and had to step down. Mr. Turner hiding back there with, with the commissioner and supervisor. So is there anybody who would like to be vice chairman?
Well, he did it to you, so I'm going to do it to him. I would like to nominate Mr. Scott as vice chair.
You know, I appreciate that, Mike, but I think I would respectfully decline and suggest one of our other two board members just because of my active involvement in other things. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes?
I'd like to put Mike Bennett's name in as a vice chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Great, now I get his name right. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition, say nay. There's none, it's unanimous. You are the vice chairman.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any public comment? Does the public disagree with whoever we've elected here? All right, there doesn't appear to be any. So, okay, now we're going to ask you, and welcome to the Public Works Director. Would you like to introduce yourself to the public, please?
Sure. Darren Schultz, Public Works Director. I'm sorry for my tardiness. The legislature is on its own clock.
I more than understand that, and we don't consider it tardy when it's the legislature. So, anyway, so we're at our next item, which is a review of the resolution that created this committee. And I told Dave earlier, Darren, that I was very pleased with the extensive information you sent out this time on that issue. It was more than we got in the beginning, and it answered a lot of questions for me. So I appreciate that.
For the record, David Briquetta. So I just wanted to go over the two things in your packet here are the resolution and then the city's financial policies. So I'll pull up the resolution on the screen here real quick. So just a quick history on this, and it was back during our rate process that we went through for the approval of the five-year rate plan. And so back on August of 2013, the Board of Supervisors recommended that we establish Utility Oversight Financial Committee. And in December 2013, the committee was officially formed, and this is the resolution from that committee. And in general, it really spells out five things that are listed up here. You can see the five areas. Talks about the number of committee members, their expert and knowledge, within the field. And then the big thing here is number 3, and that is really the scope or the purpose of the utility committee. And that has to do with providing continued compliance with board-adopted utility policies to make sure we're in compliance with our policies. As part of the process, when we went through the Board of Supervisors, there was a level of frustration because back when the plant was first built and some upgrades were made, there was funding put in place to help with future costs. And some of those costs were kept artificially low and used to sustain the plant to keep the rates low. And so when we had to do this rate increase, it was a significant rate increase, and so the board asked to have some financial policies put in place and then have the Utility Financial Oversight Committee make sure that we're meeting those policies. And then really number 4, has to do with the terms, and then item number 5 just says, we meet twice a year, or to call the chair.
Okay, are there any questions from the members? Dave, I've got one question, just so that everybody can understand. The way this is drawn up, if we're looking at the budget and we ask a pretend question, okay, such as, why did we buy 5 snow plows? You consider that an appropriate question under this resolution?
Well, I think the way the resolution reads and the intent behind it is that we set a budget, and this committee then oversees that budget to make sure we're meeting our financial policies, which we're going to talk about next. So once we've established the policy, then those line items within that, already covered. I guess that question in my mind would have been answered when the budget was approved. And so the idea then looking forward is in March, Nick will be here and will present detail about our budget and about the policies and how they're being met over the next upcoming years. Because remember, this was a phase-in period over 5 years, so as the rates come in, the idea is by the 5th year that we meet all of our financial policies.
Is there anything more you want to go over the financial policy or anything right now?
Sure, if we could. This is the financial policy that was approved. It's about a 5-page document. Nick's not here. A lot of this has to do with city policy. But if you go to the second page, specific to this committee is the enterprise funds. And these are the items that we're going to be presenting at the next committee, specific, and showing you where we reach these levels. And just talking, and they have to do with reserve levels. So the first thing is an operating expense, having an operating reserve. So the idea behind one of our financial policies is to maintain at least 45, preferably 90 days worth of operating expense in the bank. The capital reserve projects, capital project reserve, and that is to make sure that we have 2% of the total fixed assets. So the value of our total fixed asset, 2% of that would go into a capital project reserve. And then, of course, is our emergency reserves, and that's $50,000 to $75,000. That's a much smaller amount compared to some of these other reserves. The debt proceeds reserves has to do with our bonding and making sure that we meet our bonding requirements. And then the system reinvestment funding, and this is we'll have money coming in every year as part of system reinvestment funding. On the sewer plan, we had to delay system reinvestment funding 1 year to help keep rates manageable because we did the same thing in the water. So the water started first, and then the sewer is going to be phasing in starting this fiscal year in the system reinvestment funding. So at the end of 5 years, the depreciation expense will be funded in as a percentage over 5 years. So the rest of these are really city policies, and the financial, we have finance here if there's any specific questions. But specific to this committee, these are the items that we'll be presenting next meeting.
Any questions?
Yes. Dave, just a confirmation on those reserves. The debt proceeds reserves are separate from other reserves and maintained separately. Is that true? I don't mean in a separate account, but I mean the accounting is not, one doesn't cover the other.
Yes, that's true.
Kathy, did you get that was Mr. Scott? Do you need people to say their name? Okay, great, thank you. Just a technical clarification, gentlemen. So.
Thank you for getting my name right.
I think you people elected me so you can give me a hard time. Okay, is there anything else on that, Dave, that you want to bring up, or?
I just wanted to give a high-level overview and answer any
Okay.
questions or concerns
Good.
you may have.
Do we have, if there are no other questions from the committee, do we have any public comment on this? Okay, let's move on. I know you said that the consultant was going to be here at 1:30.
Yeah, so the next item is the discussion of the domestic water supplementation, item 8.
All right, let's move ahead. Okay.
So item 8 is review and discussion of the domestic water supplementation for this last calendar year and recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. So just a high-level overview, there's lots of information here in your packet that kind of just gives you a background and a history of where we were last year. But really, the goal of this, what we had to do is we didn't have enough reclaimed water to meet all of our needs. So we had to supplement with domestic water. And last calendar year, we supplemented with a little over 100 million gallons. It's 104.57 million gallons. And what we did is we will transfer the cost of that water to the water fund, because that comes from the water from the wastewater fund. And so there'll be a transfer of $71,108 from the sewer fund to the water fund for fiscal year 14-15. And what we're looking for is we want to just give a history of what we did this last year. We do expect this to actually continue, the water shortage to continue. In Manhard, when they did their calculations last year, it could go anywhere from the next 4 years to the next 30 years. So there's a lot of variables in play. So what we're proposing is that we'd be allowed to continue with the domestic water supplementation until this problem is resolved. And then what we would do is we would budget this money in our operating expense under the wastewater fund as a transfer into the sewer expense. So we didn't do this last year, and that's why this was an issue, especially in front of the board here. This year, we want to put it into our operating expense. And then the other question that came up last year was, how much is this going to cost? And what we would propose is the water that we're using comes mainly from Minden. We put it in at the Stewart Pond, which is a large holding pond for us. And a lot of that water comes from the Douglas County system. And there's an interlocal agreement that you have here that show what those costs are for the next 8 or 9 years. And we propose just adopting what those costs are is what we're going to be charged per 1,000 gallons for the supplementation process.
Committee, do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, thank you, David. Just to confirm, the placement of this amount, the $100,000 or whatever the amount might be going forward, into the operating budget of the sewer fund can be done without affecting the reserves or other requirements under the replacement parameters that we're charged to verify or confirm are being upheld and maintained? Is that accurate?
Yes, that's a correct statement.
Thank you.
I want to clarify just a couple of things, Dave, and be sure that the information I got is correct. First of all, I understand we have plenty of water, but that it's less expensive to bring water over from Douglas than it would be to open up well 4 and treat the water in that. Is that correct?
Yeah. Right now, for where we are supplementing water at the Stewart Ponds, it's cheaper to use the Minden Douglas water. That's correct.
Okay. And so if we take this money and put it into operating expense, what will we be taking it from? I mean, what won't get done with that money that if we're using it to
We have
pay for the water?
for those funds, we have an operating budget of several $1 million, and so we just reduce other line items within that budget, within that operating budget, to make up that difference of that $80,000. And we probably have 20 line items, and so we would take pieces from each one to make up that difference. When we prepare and we do our budgets, we're mostly focused. We do have, like I say, 20 line items, but at the bottom we have $2 million, and we're focused on that bottom line. Typically, those line items, some go over, some go under. We concentrate on keeping that bottom line whole, so we would fold this into that.
All right. When we met in June 3rd, what we said was, yes, go ahead and give them the water this year, but we were going to need them to pay for it in future years, which was the decision that our committee made at that time. So we're at that point now, I guess, where we discuss if they're going to be paying for the potable water, or are we just giving it to them, or?
David, well, one, to address your question, and another question I have is how far in the future are we looking to be supplementing? Is there plans to eventually make up that gap? And then the second one would be does our contracts with the owners allow us to charge them for it?
So to answer the first part of the question is, they're ongoing. We are looking at other alternatives. There are ongoing options that we're looking at. But for now, there's so many pieces associated with this process. Manhart had had stated in their presentation could be anywhere from 40 years upwards of 30 years that this shortage. 4 years. 4 years up to 30 years. So there's a lot of moving parts. So I can't say when that problem would be. There's a lot of things that are going on that can impact that variable. So we'll continue to look at alternatives in what we can do, but right now using the Minden-Gardnerville water is the system that probably has the least amount of cost associated with doing that. And then can you repeat your second part of that question?
My second part of the question was, Chairwoman Engelman talked about, I think you were getting to charging those golf courses. Does the agreement we have with the golf courses to take our effluent allow us to charge them for our effluent?
It's not in the agreement to charge them for it, but there is sections in the municipal code that has that as an option. And if you go in your packet, it talks about that. That was one of the options that we presented last year. And the board ultimately, chose not to select that option.
So, excuse me, Dave, or Darren. Excuse me, allergies. Do we have some idea of what the cost might be? I mean, the fact that we ran out of effluent is an act of God, as far as I'm concerned. We certainly didn't cause it. We didn't say we're shutting off the effluent. Have we looked at that at all?
Well, looking at how much effluent that we're going to produce, and that was part of the variable. I mean, there's, growth rate. When you look at, where we're predicting our growth to go at about 0.5% a year roughly, but we did do projections upwards of 2% growth. I know that we've had some inquiry of some larger customers coming in, so all that could really change, but that would have an impact. So as a business came in and they delivered more effluent, that would go up. But our trend on our effluent so far, has went down. In general, in the last 10, 12 years, we've lost about 25% of our total flow to the plant. So, it's went from roughly 5.5 million gallons a day down to about 4 million gallons a day. And this last year, it's maintained really relatively stable. It's going to depend on how wet or how dry the year is, and that's going to have an impact, but it's maintained relatively stable. So, unless something unusual changes, it will probably go up associated with the growth.
Yeah, just a couple comments. My recollection of last year regarding our discussion was pretty much in the context of we don't want to see next year, thinking that we're sitting here in June last year, we don't want to see next year impact the reserves that our committee is established to monitor and report to the Board of Supervisors on. And so the way I look at this, staff is telling us they can pay for this cost out of sewer funds which are operating and not reserves. And in my mind, that's pretty much where our purview ends. We may have a thought for the board or something for the board to talk about, but frankly, I'm not sure it's within our charge to recommend that the board charge or not charge if we're able to say our mission is accomplished and what they do separate from that is a policy. The board could make a determination to find money from other sources and that sort of thing. So I think I'm struggling with, in my mind, the opinion or the thought about should they be charged or not is really not before us if staff can assure us that it's not coming out of an area that we are responsible for recommending to the board be maintained whole.
I think that's a good point. I also think, though, that we're a little stymied in that we don't have the budget in front of us. So, excuse me, I would think we, excuse me, might want to put this off until the March meeting, and when we have a chance to look at the budget and see exactly what the impact, if any, would be, and ensure that we're not hitting the reserves and so forth. How does the committee feel about that?
We have an auditor on our committee now, so we might want to give him a shot.
If I could just get some background on this. I'm looking at your code, and like you said, in code, there is the authority to charge 10 cents per 1,000 gallons of effluent. Why have we never charged for this effluent? What created this where we had to give them the water for free? If you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
I mean, I don't have a direct answer. I know that it's been in the municipal code for a while, but it's really just been policy set by the board.
So you don't know why the board waived this 10 cents to the, was it based because of the federal government with their requirements on the discharge and you had to get rid of it in a hurry, or does anybody know?
Excuse me, yes. Excuse me, I think I can answer that since I was around when these agreements were initially made by then the Public Works Director, who was Larry Werner. And at the time, everything had been shut down in Carson City by the EPA because we had too much effluent going into the river. And so we needed a way to be able to appease the EPA, shall we say. So one of the ways was by putting the effluent on different properties. And so we needed them to take the effluent. We weren't going to ask them to pay for it since we needed them to take it more than they needed it at the time. So, and it includes not just golf courses, but the prison farm and other areas and so forth. So would anybody like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, Mike, another factor has been more recently the potential impact of the economy, or the impact of charging for the effluent on the economy associated with primarily the golf courses where it was utilized. And so it became I think, an important element in trying to keep the pieces together during the economic downturn.
All right, is there any public comment on this issue? And welcome to former Vice Chairman of the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark Turner for the record. I'm with Silver Oak Golf Course, and just to give you a little bit more background on how effluent works in our world, and I'm sure the members of the City Engineering Department can corroborate these items, but the disposal of the effluent must take place not just on bare ground, but it needs to go onto a growing crop so it can utilize and break down the nitrates, and then they're not transferred into the groundwater. So the golf courses and the prison farm actually end up being a part of the wastewater disposal system for Carson City, and I think that's part of the reason, or most of the reason why the effluent has not been charged for. As Bruce alluded to earlier, the economy around golf is still very problematic, and although things are better for us, let's just say we're losing less money trying to operate a golf course. In our neighborhood, we don't really have a choice. We have a neighborhood that's been built around a golf course, and closing that golf course, as you can imagine, is probably not an option that we could actually pursue. Based on the fact that there's 500 pieces of private property that directly abut to it. So for now, we've kind of become prisoner to the golf business, and we have to continue to operate that golf course as the values of those properties, the taxable value of those properties is somewhat dependent on the fact that they are located adjacent to a golf course. As far as our needs and our usage of water, we try to use it as judiciously as possible. But as David can attest to, there are points in the year, usually the second week in July to probably the middle of August, where the water needs are really, really high, and there's no means of conservation that can overcome 100-degree temperatures and 30-mile-an-hour winds. You just can't do anything about that other than just to keep placing water. And I think that's the most stressful time of the year on your system as far as delivering water is concerned. After that, we hit September, and the needs for water reduce quite rapidly as the evaporation rates fall quickly, and then usually the system can supply what we need after that point in time. But so that's kind of our understanding of effluent, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Yes, Mark. So your course, it was built with the intent of using effluent then, is that
Yeah,
correct?
at the time that our course was built, and the same time that the other courses were built, the problem was quite the opposite. There was an overabundance of effluent. The city had encouraged us to build a golf course. They needed places to put effluent, and we hadn't really considered the fact that we may run out of effluent, or it could be a supply problem. That was not within the realm of possibility back in those days. Well, things have changed, obviously, and with the recession, we had reduced usage, less water flowing into the wastewater treatment system, and then drought as well. And I think, David, you said that work on the sewer lines has reduce the amount of infiltration and exfiltration of water into the Carson City sewer system. So you've actually reduced the amount of unwanted water that enters the sewer system by rehabbing some of the lines, replacing some of the lines. So all these things have kind of added up to create this little perfect storm that we have right now. You have any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we certainly have an all-star audience today. The city manager just came in. Thank you. And we have two supervisors, so. Okay, committee, what's your pleasure?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just by way of clarification, my recollection of our this discussion at our last meeting was that the approval to utilize potable water to supplement was approved for that specific year, and the discussion, and I believe the determination was that specific question would be addressed on its own merits in the upcoming year, which is where we are now. And to touch on what Bruce had said, I don't recall the discussion going to who was going to be charged, whether it was going to be the water fund or the users. Like, again, like Bruce says, it's up to others besides us to determine who, if any, would pay for that.
All right, committee, would you like to postpone this issue for the next meeting when we have the budget in front of us, so we can ensure that the reserves is being held whole, and have some idea if there's any effect, if any?
Madam Chair, may I just make a comment? We're working on the presentation. We're putting together the packages now, with the budget, and showing you that we're going to be able to achieve within the 5-year time frame all of our budget reserves. And when we put this together, it was put together with the assumption that there would be an operating expense, a line item put in the operating expense, and we would still be able to meet our financial reserves.
Okay, then I guess I would ask for a motion to postpone this issue to the next meeting when we can take a look at the budget.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move that we postpone this item until we see the more detailed budget presentation.
And is there a second?
I second that motion.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Madam Chair, the next item on the agenda was our consultants, and they said they would be here between 1:30 and 2 o'clock.
Oh, we didn't have enough public comment. So,
Short recess.
yes, we'll take a short recess. going to go to the next item on the agenda. Which has to do with charging or raising the hookup fees for construction. We're waiting for a consultant who's not here yet. I know we have some public comment. I think I'd like to go ahead and hear from the public. Then we can look at the consultant, and then we can hear from the public again. So if there's some public comment out there, please come forward and give us your name and affiliation, if any.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. For the record, Aaron West, CEO of the Builders Alliance, here on behalf of our almost 700-member companies, looking out for the best interests of the growth of Carson City. We've had ongoing conversations with staff, and I appreciate their openness and forthcoming with information. The challenge, I think, that in looking at the presentation for today and trying to translate that to the dollar amounts that are being contemplated for rates, I think we just have some more questions. In looking at historically, what have impact fees gone for? And typically you look at the ratepayer is responsible for, the ongoing maintenance and replacement of the systems necessary to serve them. And then you have, traditionally you have impact fees that may come in, but it's completely to facilitate future expansion of necessary facilities. So wastewater treatment plant, water treatment plant. My understanding is that we have substantial capacity within those existing systems today. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find that information in the presentation. It did under the water side, it indicated approximately 23,000 current users. The rates being based on a growth of approximately 4,500 users. To me, it sounds like a pretty aggressive number based on where we've been historically in terms of growth. So I'm concerned about the imposition of some pretty substantial fees for over the course of what could be a very long term, when we're really creating some short-term impacts that aren't being realized. Unfortunately, Supervisor Bankowski had to step out, but we were sharing some concerns from an economic development perspective. Obviously, the builders are very interested in economic development because that fuels construction jobs, right? Whether it's commercial buildings or homes for the folks that are going to work there. For the last few years, we've had a competitive advantage over jurisdictions like Lyon County or Douglas County. And to some degree, there have been ongoing conversations over the last few years with potential users and potential companies looking to relocate here that has been on the table, that we do have a competitive advantage because of our de minimis impact fees. So I think in talking with economic development folks, there is a real concern about the potential impact to that to the region from an economic development perspective. If now, after a couple of years of working with these companies, we all talk about the Tesla effect and how that's creating this interest. Well, if we've been talking with these companies for a couple of years, we finally get them to the point that they're ready to sign on the dotted line, and all of a sudden we say, oh, by the way, based on some of the numbers in the presentation that I've seen, you could be asking an industrial user to step up $300,000 to $500,000, and all of a sudden that's a huge number. So. I think we have had conversations about if we can get all the numbers on the table, if we can distill that down into what the real impacts are over the next 5, 10, 20 years, and then look at how do we phase those in to make sure that the utility's protected, but to I feel like we're still in the infant stages. I feel like there's a lot more work to be done, and I'd love to have some clarification. But my understanding is that capacity is not a problem right now in either the water or the sewer system. So I think we have some time to work through this and really dig into the numbers.
Okay. Thank you. I also have an email here I was asked to read into the record. This is from Thomas R. Metcalf, excuse me, Metcalf Builders. As a general contractor and developer in northern Nevada, it is my opinion that my home of Carson City needs all the help it can get to compete with Reno and Sparks. In my opinion, Carson City is considered a second-tier development opportunity in northern Nevada. My commercial and industrial clients want to be near UNR and the population base. My multifamily clients want to be near the commercial and industrial clients. Excuse me. It is definitely synergistic. When it comes to promoting the town I live in, I have to deal with out-of-town investors and their money. A lot of times I will tour a client through Carson City and they simply say their money will only lend to them in Reno and Sparks area. Carson City needs to be competitive. Leave the hookup fees alone for now. I will be more than happy to volunteer on a board of any kind and help figure out the best solution that will keep Carson City at the forefront of quality development here in northern Nevada. Regards, Thomas R. Metcalf. And Kathy has a copy of that for the record. Is there any other public comment?
Yes, thanks again, Madam Chair. Mark Turner for the record. Just wanted to float a couple comments regarding this matter. First off, the question that I have is what are the water and sewer connection fees for? If I am providing the infrastructure as we continue to develop our property, I put the pipe in the ground, I put the pit setters in, why am I charged to connect to what I've paid to put into the ground? No one's really answered that question for me very well. And I'm just asking because I don't know, and no one's provided that answer. Secondarily, just to echo Aaron's comments and Tom Metcalf's comments, we're doing quite well in Carson City for the first time, I believe, in attracting industry and new residents to this town. We are basically, in my mind, in the second inning of a 9-inning ball game of being able to diversify our economic portfolio in Carson City in a manner that is extremely necessary and at a time and place when it's extremely necessary. We have not had this opportunity in the past, I don't believe. As Aaron said, we do have a competitive advantage here. And for industrial and commercial users, for them to look at the jurisdictions that are available to them, Lyon County, Douglas County, Reno Sparks, their decision to locate is heavily dependent on economics. I don't think it's a good idea at all to take that recruitment tool away from Carson City at this point. We're not there. We're not ready. We have become an item on people's radar, but people have not planted the stake here yet. And I think that it would be very foolish at this point to change the game, especially for people who have been heavily involved in economic development, trying to promote Carson City, trying to diversify our economy in such a manner so that we are more resistant to the effects of downturns, the likes of which we saw from 2007 on to 2011. I don't think that the connection fees generate a substantial amount of revenue to justify the sacrifice of the recruiting tool. That's something that I think we need to focus on very carefully. So as you continue to ponder this issue, I ask that you really give some thought to that. For example, if an industrial user who has been interested in Carson City finds out suddenly that they could possibly face a $300,000 or a $500,000 connection fee, we would probably jeopardize our opportunity to land that client in Carson City. I think it's, in my mind, and the minds of the people that I've spoken with, the value of the subscriber far exceeds the connection fee. Having a long-term payer into the system, the Carson City water and sewer system, is far more valuable than a one-time connection fee. This is a concept that's ubiquitous in the business world. That's why iPhones that really cost $700 are offered for $200 because your cellular company wants your $129 a month for whatever length of time that you continue to pay. The old adage about the Gillette Mach 5 razor, they give away the $25 handle and charge you $9 a cartridge. It's the ongoing business which is far more valuable to Carson City than the one-time connection fee. So I think that we should focus on that. We should also remember that the developers are bringing subscribers, ratepayers, and taxpayers in, and these are inducements to the development community to get people to land here. I've been building homes here in Northern Nevada for 25 years. I have developments in Douglas County, Carson City, and Reno. And I can tell you that the people that we want, people relocating from wealthier areas like Los Angeles, San Francisco, are looking at all three of these areas here. And economics are part of their decision-making process. I think that we can all agree that we would like those people to invest in Carson City, to purchase a home in Carson City, begin paying rates in Carson City, and pay property taxes in Carson City. And this tool that we have now is very, very valuable. We're going to see an ongoing stream of people leaving states like California and considering Nevada for their new residence for a significant time in the future. We want those people to come here. So please don't take away that tool. Please consider that carefully before you do that. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Hey, Mark, geez, excuse me, $454 is what I see here is the connection fee for water. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah, and it's how the fee is done. It's called for water, it's called a water equivalent residential charge. Our consultants have arrived.
But if you're building a number of homes, that's per house, is that correct?
That's correct.
It isn't just a one-time thing for a
Correct.
PUD, you have to do it per house, right?
Correct. Each time you build a house and you have a new address and you connect to Carson City's water system, that would be the charge.
And connection fees that are in the other counties, are those also per house?
That's my experience, that they are all on a per unit, per lot basis.
All right, and what about commercial? I don't know how it works with commercial. I'm more familiar with home building than I am with the...
Commercial has a lot to do with the level of usage, and Mike Bennett knows a lot about this. Certain industrial users use a lot of water. Other industrial users use less water, and the volume of water that they plan on consuming will translate directly to what fee they pay.
Are there other questions? I think perhaps our consultants might be here, but go ahead.
Mark raised one question that I think staff might want to address, and that is where these connection charges would typically go, or what the justification for them would be.
Well, and I think Mark brought up a lot of good questions, and actually a lot of them are answered in the presentation. So if you wouldn't mind, let's go through the presentation, and then we can address specific things that may come up out of that.
That'll work. Great. Thank you.
Yes, I will be having public comment after the presentation also, so this is not your only chance.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So Dave, you want to introduce?
Okay. I would like to introduce Krista from FCS Group. They helped us with this, and I have the PowerPoint presentation here, so Krista, if you want to stand up there. Just let me know when you want to go to the next slide. So let me start from the beginning.
Okay. Thank you very much. And this will be about a 20-minute presentation or so. Feel free to jump in with questions or hold them till the end, either way. And I'll just go ahead and get started.
Could you state your full name for the record?
I'm Krista Shirley with FCS Group.
Yes, could you, yeah, your voice is very soft, so.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So we'll begin with an overview of the methodology that will be used for both the water and sewer utilities. Then we'll go through some draft results for the water utility and some different scenarios that we've developed. Then go through draft results for the sewer utility and talk about any implementation and next steps. So what you see on the screen is the overall connection charge methodology. We'll go through different parts of each component and then look at the values associated with each of those in a few slides. You'll see on the numerator there's the system costs, the existing system, and then future costs from the adopted CIP. And the denominator is made up of the existing customer base plus any additional incremental growth that serves as the future customer base. In the numerator, the existing cost component is made up of the system assets, and we'll talk about the dollar values associated with this in a few slides. Then there's also some interest included that can be up to 10 years per asset. And we deduct the outstanding debt, which is paid for in rates so that nobody's being double charged for anything. And that's net of the cash balances that can be applied to that debt. And then finally, we deduct any contributed capital that's donated or grant funded. Since the existing customers wouldn't have paid for that, the future customers also would not be expected to pay for that. In the future cost component, that's intended to recover the assets that are being built to serve the growth. So it's based on the adopted 5-year CIP. Again, deducts out any grant or donated assets that are not being paid for by any citizens, and deducts also the repair and replacement projects, since those are being paid for by user rates. So the future costs are solely focused on the upgrade and expansion portion to serve growth. One thing to note is that the planning period of the capital program is the 5-year CIP, and that matches with the denominator of the customer base to serve the same, that the assets are to serve the same customer base, and those match. So in the denominator, we make sure that the planning period is consistent with that 5-year CIP, and the water scenarios were developed based on the different units that make up the customer base. So we've noted that there are meter equivalents, and those are based on the American Water Works Association manual, the standard meter equivalent factors, and those increase with meter size to represent the capacity, potential capacity and demand placed on the system. A different approach is looking at the usage-based equivalent residential units, and those would be what your current work and CERC look at. And then the final scenario we'll look at is a demand-based ERU, and so that is maximum day demand that we'll be looking at, which is similar to how Tumwa does their connection charges currently. So we'll jump into the water utility draft results. As I mentioned, the costs, the existing and future costs, will be the same in each of these scenarios, and the difference between the scenarios will come from the different definitions of the customer base. So this is an overview of each of the scenarios, and then we'll take a look at the numbers that go along with those. So our first scenario, scenario A, is an updated work value. So we looked at your customer statistics, focusing on fiscal year 13-14 customer data, and saw that the average residential unit uses about 425 gallons per day. And that's less than the current definition of 550 gallons per day. Over time, single-family residences tend to have been using less water, and conservation programs have been in effect. And so the 425 is a better representation of the current level. So we've defined that as 1 work per residential unit. And then we also looked at what the duplex customer usage is, and they use about half as much per unit, so that was updated to 0.5 work per unit. We looked at multifamily as well, and they're using even less at about 30% per unit of a single-family residence. Then all other classes, your commercial and industrial customers, that would be based on usage of 425 gallons per day, which is the single-family equivalent. In scenario B, we look at the meter capacity equivalents, and those are the American Water Works Association equivalency factors that I was mentioning. Those increase by meter size, and so we'd take your smallest meter size of 5/8 inch, and that would represent the 1.0, and then each larger meter size would be multiplied by those meter equivalents. Scenario C is the demand-based equivalent unit, and that's the maximum day GPM that's shown. So that would be calculated by estimating a maximum day water use for each connecting customer when they went through the permitting process. And because of that, we'd recommend that that only is applicable to non-single-family customers, and that it would be focused on those larger customers with meter sizes of 1.5 inch or larger. So moving on to the customer-based definitions, what we see here is the average day and maximum day demand of the systems, and that's the existing capacity and future capacities that was provided by city staff. And the difference between the average day and maximum day, you'll see is that footnote, the 2.05 according to the master planning documents. So your system is designed for about twice maximum day demand as your average day demand. Then in each of the scenarios, the usage-based ERUs, which is your updated work, is calculated based on the average day system capacity, since it looks at average day usage values. In scenario B, the meter capacity equivalents were calculated by looking at your customer base by meter size and calculating those for the existing value and increasing those by those growth factors you see in the right-hand column to get to the future customer base number. Then scenario C is calculated from those system capacity numbers. Since it's based on maximum day demand, it's calculated off of the maximum day system capacity values for both existing and future. Now we come to the summary of the values. For both the existing and future cost basis, those will be the same for all scenarios. So the existing costs are comprised of your current capital assets at about $134.6 million and your construction work in progress of $2.8 million. We subtract out, as mentioned, any contributed assets, which is the $25.8 million, add in about $40.4 million of interest, and again, that's up to 10 years per asset, and subtract out the debt principal outstanding net against the existing cash basis. So your total existing costs are $95.5 million, and then they're added to future costs of $8.2 million, which is calculated from your 5-year CIP of $16.7 million, and removing those repair and replacement projects that will be paid for by rates. So your total costs in each scenario are $103.7 million, and that number is going to be divided by the total customer base that was calculated under each of the scenarios. So you'll see the bottom line represents the calculated connection charge under each scenario that serves as, in scenario A, one work, which would be the $3,763. Under scenario B, it would be the 1.0 smallest meter size. The 5/8 inch meter would pay $3,440. And under the maximum day GPM, that would be calculated and applied per estimated maximum day use, and that's $6,219. And so we'll look at comparisons in a few slides between different commercial customers. And first we'll see the full rate schedules for each of those options. So under scenario A, as mentioned, the single-family residence would have a proposed charge of $3,763. And then those work factors in that middle column right after the titles show the work factors for each. 0.5 for duplexes, 0.3 for apartments. You'll notice that last line at the bottom, all others per work, and that's going to be based on estimated usage of 425 gallons per day. So the proposed charge schedule will be in the right-hand column for each of those types. Going on to the meter capacity equivalent rate schedule. This is the most common rate schedule that's seen in connection charges. It's fairly straightforward to calculate and apply. It's based on the meter size of each customer, and you'll see those meter equivalency factors from the AWWA manual in the middle column. So beginning with the 5/8 inch meter, it's $3,440 for a charge, and then increasing on up with the meter size. You'll note at that bottom line, we show a multifamily per unit alternate charge. So one option is to charge multifamily customers based on their number of units instead of their meter size. And as it was calculated in the revised work, multifamily customers use about 30% of single-family customers per unit. So we'd apply that 30% to the 5/8 inch meter charge, since that's what single-family customers primarily use, and that charge would be applied per unit. Again, we'll look at what the differences between each scenario is in a few slides. In scenario C, the calculated charge of $6,219 would be applied per estimated maximum day gallons per minute for those customers. Again, we would recommend that this would be an option only for non-single-family residential meter sizes 1.5 inches or larger. This is because the high water users tend to be undercharged in the meter equivalency approach based on their usage. And we'll see that example when we look at the comparisons on the next slide. So this slide here, just to walk through an overview really quickly, we have, starting from the left, a bunch of different customer types. And we worked with city staff to develop this list of representative customers. And so you'll see types of their descriptions on the left, followed by the meter size for each of those customers. In scenario A, which is going to be the blue shaded cells, we have their average daily use for each customer and what the equivalent work calculated at that 425 gallons per day would be. And the resulting charge, multiplying the work by the $3,763 per work of scenario A. In scenario B, it's the orange shaded cells, and that's the meter capacity equivalent scenario. Again, based on those meter sizes, we have the meter capacity equivalent ratios in the first orange column and the applicable charge from the rate schedule in that second column. Under scenario C, the maximum day GPM, each customer's maximum daily use was based on their maximum month multiplied by a 1.5 times factor to represent the maximum daily estimate. And then that was multiplied by $6,219 per maximum day gallons per minute to get the resulting charge, which is the column on the far right. So the differences, as I mentioned, between low use and high use customers. If you look at that first line there, the restaurant one, shows that it has a 2-inch meter and is using slightly under 2,000 gallons per day. And you'll notice that the meter equivalent charge is the highest of the three, and scenario A and scenario C are more in line with each other. Compare that to a high-use customer. For example, restaurant 3, the third line down, has a smaller size meter, 1-inch meter, but uses nearly twice as much on a gallons per day average use. You'll see again that scenario A and scenario C are slightly in line with each other at about $33,000 and $34,000 of charge. But because they're a high-use customer, they're being undercharged in the meter capacity equivalent at $8,600. So that's just an example, and you can see by different customers the different charges apply. On the following page, we focus on the multifamily customers. You'll see we have in the units column for these for apartments and mobile home parks. And under scenario A, instead of being volume-based, this is based on that 0.3 work per unit. And so you'll see that resulting charge on a per unit, or in total, calculated per unit. Then in scenario B, you'll see, in addition to the MCE ratio and what the resulting charge would be by applying the meter size schedule, that alternate multifamily charge option, which is the 30% of the 5/8 inch charge applied per unit, is right next to that in the right-hand orange column under scenario B. Scenario C was calculated the same way as it was for the other commercial customers. Estimated maximum daily use applied to the $6,219 to get the resulting maximum day charge. So moving on to the recommended approach, we've brought forward 2 recommended options. And the goal in these is to balance the administrative ease with the fairness in calculation. So the first option represents a hybrid approach of the three scenarios presented. The meter capacity equivalence, which was scenario B, we would recommend that that would apply to all customers with meter sizes up through 1 inch, except multifamily. Multifamily up through 1 inch meters would be charged based on that alternate multifamily schedule, which is the 30% of the 5/8 inch charge times their number of units. And then non-single family customers with larger meter sizes of 1.5 inches or larger could either be charged by the work schedule, the revised work, or the maximum day GPM schedule, which we feel would better reflect their potential demand on the system. In option 2, it would simply use the updated work schedule and would apply to all customers. That would be if the goal is to have a more simplified schedule, easier to balance with the administrative process. So to compare the connection charges, Carson City's current charge has been very low, and you can see that at the $454. We wanted to compare to other systems, and so you'll see on the right, the Douglas County and Lyon County systems would still be higher than each of the proposed options. This represents a sample single-family connection charge, and it is good to note that the other surveyed jurisdictions also include water rights fees. Only the connection charges are shown here on the screen. Moving on to the sewer utility, we have one option we've brought forward here, and that's an updated CERC calculation. So similar to water, we looked at the usage data, and for sewer, it's assumed that the flow contributed to the system is equivalent to the winter water use, and that the peaking water use during the summer period is primarily outdoor water use that doesn't return to the system. So the winter water average for single-family residences, we calculated at about 200 gallons per day, and that's slightly lower than the current definition of 250 gallons per day. So looking at the duplex and multifamily customers, if we go back one slide, thanks. The duplex customers and multifamily did not have as much outdoor water use, and so the factors are slightly higher here. About 75% of winter water use for duplex and about 65% for multifamily. And then your other commercial industrial classes would be calculated based on the assumed 200 gallons per day. Thanks. So we show the schedule here, gone through and done the calculations, and you'll see the single-family residence would be calculated at $44.93, and then the CERC factors in that second column would apply to that $44.93, and they're shown in the column to the right. We did a comparison of the connection charges for sewer as well, and those are shown here. Again, the Carson City existing charge is very low right now, and we surveyed Sparks, Washoe County, Douglas County, and Lyon County in sewer, and the proposed connection charge under the revised CERC would be just slightly higher than Sparks and significantly lower than some of the others, so still right around the low end of the range of your neighbors. So in implementing these charges, any of the water scenarios or the revised CERC calculation for sewer would represent the maximum allowable charge within that scenario definition. The city does have the choice to implement a charge at any level up to that charge. The calculations have been done in current day dollars, and so to update for future years, we recommend updating connection charges usually about once every 5 years or so, or usually going along with your master planning efforts. So to update in the interim, you can either recalculate connection charges annually, build in a provision for inflation, or what we would typically recommend is that you take the current charge and you escalate it by an index such as the Engineering News Record Construction Cost Index. And that's widely accepted as a general principle to update year by year. The next steps that we'd be looking for is some policy direction on selecting a water option or going forward how you'd like us to proceed with any of the water or sewer options. And then we can also develop a phase-in strategy to bring back for any of the selected options, where we could look at going from your current low charges up to a higher charge over a number of years, 3 years, 5 years, et cetera. Do you have any questions?
Committee?
Yeah, I think I'd like to go back to that question, and you potentially, I think you missed during public comment because it was before you arrived, but the question came up, what do the connection fees go for in a typical system if I, as a developer, and don't allow me to misspeak about what you said, Mark, but basically if I, as a developer, put in the infrastructure in my subdivision, what does the connection fee go to? Why do I owe, or why would I be charged for a connection fee when I put in all of the infrastructure for my particular development?
Sure. So the infrastructure that's specific to the development is already brought out of the connection charges, so that would not be double counted. The infrastructure that is being paid for is what's common to the entire system, so you're looking at treatment plants and storage facilities and water mains and pumping and all of those things that have already been paid for by the existing customers and that are set up to essentially take the water from its raw source to that development point that the developer has paid for. Any other questions?
Yes, on your comparison of connection charges for the sewer.
Sure.
As far as the all others per circ was going to be 14493. Now, in the other count, like in Washoe County, do they do the same thing as like the 5,450 per circ for the industrial, or how would that work?
I don't recall off the top of my head what Washoe County's structure is. This chart was primarily focused on comparing single-family residences since it can vary so much by commercial types.
Okay.
I could go back and look and see if we have other data on that.
While that chart is up there, I assume the water rate reference at the bottom, water right reference, is erroneous and should be water?
Yes, I apologize. That was copied over on accident.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. Going back to the formula, first or second slide, how the connection charge is calculated, my understanding how development occurs is when a project were to come forward, if there are demands on the system that can't be met by the existing system, then typically the developer is required to upgrade that system to the point that their project can be served. So if I'm correct in that, then why would we add future project costs in there? What line item is that covering in that part of that calculation? And I guess for the same side of that, why would we add in future growth served?
I can take that, I think. What we're looking at with that, and this is 30,000 foot level, is for example, an expansion to our wastewater treatment plant. We can serve a set number of connections with our current plant as it is now, and as we're fixing the problems that we have. We're not building a plant for expansion right now. We're fixing what we have. So the goal behind it is that as more and more connections are made to our system, that existing plant as we have it is not big enough, and we're going to have to expand it and add future components to take in this extra flow. So as that fee is collected over time, it would go to pay for that expansion. If you don't have a connection fee, if you're not building funds over time, when you reach that point where that plant has to be expanded, then we have to come back and we would have to roll that back into rates. So it would be spread out over the entire populace of the city paying for the expansion of that plant. So that's high level, but that's what we're talking about.
So Darren, are you saying that a certain portion of the hookup fees would then go into the reserve fund?
Yes, the hookup fees, not the reserve fund that we talked about earlier in the meeting, which is set to for an emergency or to fix infrastructure that we have in the ground now, but it would be set aside and used for when we need to do that future upgrade or future expansion. That's when that money would be used.
And Darren, to me, that's kind of the heart of what this committee is about, is making sure that that reserve is available at that time. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair. That is a fair statement. Although that specific reserve that you're referring to, that was not established in our financial policies that we did before, because we didn't have anything in place to establish it. But if we were to move forward in this, I would see that policy being amended to set aside a reserve specifically for this, so money that is collected, it is earmarked specifically for that use.
So then, Darren, are we talking about two different reserve funds?
Yes. If you and the Board of Supervisors so desires, that's, in my mind, that would be the cleanest way to do it.
Mr. Spell, could you tell us the difference between a fee and a tax? If you like, I can direct it to Nick.
Well, in my opinion, for the record, Nick Providenti, Finance Director, a fee is something that you pay for and get a service of, and a tax is basically imposed on the entire population. It's not, you don't necessarily receive a service or a specific service for that tax. Is that close enough?
So I guess that's part of my concern. I want to ensure that if we're charging fees, that they're getting something for the fee. That's, you know.
I was going to address a different topic, so you.
Let me just address that, because it's right up here, and that's the existing system cost. So, and this came up as part of the public comment. You know, we have a system right now that we have an average flow of the plant's about 4 million gallons a day, and the capacity is 6.9. So when you build something, you always build it a little bigger, economies of scale. So we have that capacity, but right now, you know, that capacity will be consumed with people, you know, who come online with it. And so as new people hook up to the system, they connect to their share of that system, even though it's existing, because that's already part of the calculations. So it's an existing component of that, and they pay for their share, what they're using out of this. And as you remember, when we did the rate structure, one of the things the board was very concerned about, because we redid the whole rate structure, and one of the things we looked at were subsidies. You know, they made it clear to us as staff that they didn't want to continue with subsidies, you know, that they wanted the process to pay for its equal share in itself. And so that's why we're back talking about a system connection charge, because a component of that, we have that system built, and when people connect to it, but eventually once we run out of that existing system, then we have to move into the future costs. And if we don't have the cost to cover existing or the future, that's where now we start to look, well, then who's going to have to pay for that expansion capacity?
And essentially, we raised residential rates 15%, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's correct. 15% phased in over 5 years each year.
Yes.
Madam Chair, a lot of the presentation that I heard, it seems like it's a combination of methodology, which is what you've described, Krista, versus the actual dollar amount, which is a concern to the development community. What really caught my eye in your presentation is when, on one slide for the implementation, you said the city may implement any charge up to this amount. So correct. With regard to the methodology, is the methodology, the alternative methodologies, is that okay with staff as far as ease of implementation?
May I address that?
I'll take it. See my hands over here. Danny Rotter, Public Works Engineering Manager.
On the water and sewer side, the CERCs, we currently use that method, so it just revises the 200 gallons per day instead of 250 gallons per day, so no big deal there. The water side, we use the work already, so option B wouldn't be any implementation differences. And option A, although I think it looked a little bit more complicated, I walked through this with them all, and I feel that it's pretty simple. It actually really simplifies the single-family residence because it's based on the meter equivalent, and then the higher meter sizes are where you get into the industrial user, the commercial users that has a varying level of usage, and there's not very many of those, so even though it's a little bit more time intensive on those, I feel that with the development side and the review of that, it's not terribly burdensome and would be pretty easy. I do want to just back up real quickly instead of turning off my mic. Mike asked a question, and also it was in relation to Mark's question. When a developer comes in and builds a project, let's say it's a greenfield spot, and they build the distribution lines to serve the development. Every year on a fiscal year basis, the city engineer does what's called a fixed asset accounting. So when a permit is built and done and closed out, we account for that water and sewer system component, and that's included when what's deducted and called deduction of contributions. So in that section where it says minus 25 million or whatever it was, that's accounting for all the developer contributions. Now, the rest of it is the storage tanks, the wells, treatment plant, transmission lines, the east-west going through right over here in the park. If a development came in and we didn't have the capacity and a new well was supposed to be drilled and it perfectly met the capacity of that development, then there has been certain circumstances where that would be, if it was built by the developer, it would then go into the deduction on contributions. So I think that answers your question, Mike, of how that all happens in throughout the effect of the project. And if there's any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
If I could, just to go back to that hypothetically you had of a developer building a well and the capacity of the well exactly match what he needed. What happened if there's excess capacity?
So going back to the equation, when we have the future project costs or the future growth served, it all comes out in the wash in that calculation, because let's say the capacity, it's $1 million well and it serves only 200 homes, but there's excess capacity for another 200 homes. The future connection charges go to those next 200 homes. Does that make sense? So I'm not describing it well. That contribution gets deducted from the overall accounting, and then the total customer base is increased as well. Does that make sense?
So you do the numerator and the denominator.
So the numerator and the denominator are increasing.
I think if I may, I think Randy's question is more, does the city buy that excess capacity? Is that a fair?
Yes.
Typically, that's what would happen. Yes.
May I make one more comment? And this came out here, and it kind of addresses one of the questions that was brought up. With charges, like this is an example of the work, the water side, where it shows the existing charge at single-family residence of $554. The proposed charge goes to $37.63. One thing to note, it was in 2000, I believe in 10, is when we cut our rates. And basically the rates were cut by about 1/10. So prior to that, our charge per work was about $4,500. And so our current charges are actually even, proposed to be lower because we've updated both our work and CERC calculations. And so these charges aren't unusual. I mean, this is how the industry does charges. And then we went through these multiple options to help bring, ideas so that we have the most flexibility in addressing and having businesses come into Carson City to be successful.
Are there any more questions from the committee?
Madam Chair. One more question on my side. I think what I heard, Darren, is you would support a second reserve account for that future cost. of infrastructure. I assume the existing cost, that gets allocated to its own reserve account and it's used for future project upgrades or utility replacements?
Yes, I think we would support the idea of connection fees being earmarked for a specific use such that, we've heard of other areas getting in trouble using them for the wrong things. So yes, we would be in favor of that.
Okay, if I may, just to clarify my question, connection fees will not be charged to subsidize user rates?
That's correct. Is that right?
They legally cannot be used.
Krista, thank you. Let me ask you to, Dave?
Excuse me, Karen Johnson with the FCS Group. I just wanted to make one clarifying comment on the replacement reserves and the use of the connection charge revenues. As we noted, there are the two components. There's the existing costs and the future costs. And the component is designed to do kind of an equitable cost sharing idea where you're charging them to make sure they're paying a fair share of that. There is not a legal requirement that those be used only for growth-related projects. So I think maybe where the comment on specific things, those are impact fees as opposed to connection charges. So impact fees, which are something different than connection charges, can only be used for specific projects. What the intent of the connection charge calculation is you look at your approved capital improvement program of what you have in the current knowledge base of what you're going to be doing. You design a fair fee and collect those revenues with the intent to help pay for capital projects. It doesn't have to be a specific line item capital improvement project like an impact fee does. So just a clarification there that there isn't a restriction on the reserve. The only restriction on what you can use connection charge monies for is it has to be used for capital and for each utility. So the water connection fee would have to be used for water capital projects or to pay water debt service payments that have been incurred to pay for water capital. But it is not restricted to only growth-related or upgrades. It can be used for any capital project. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Does that? Krista, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to take a seat. I want to see if there's some questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to see if there's some questions for you from the audience, so I invite people to come up and if you have any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Aaron West with the Builders Alliance. I guess going back to my original comments and concerns about how these fees are put together, when you look at the financial analysis of the water scenario summary, again, this talks about dollars, and actually it talks about hypothetical dollars. So in terms of the total future projects, which is what they're anticipating they need to meet, and why we need to have $4,000 as an impact fee, it's to meet a future project cost that is developed based on a 5-year CIP, and I give these guys credit for working hard, as hard as they can to try and estimate those demands over the next 5 years. But it doesn't speak to the existing capacity that's already in the system. So for the numbers, and these numbers weren't provided until it was clarified today. So as it relates to your sewer, right now you have capacity of 6.9 million gallons in the current plant. There's only 4 million going into it. The reality of that situation is that even if you only went to 80% of the plant's capacity, you're still talking about a 50% increase over the current users in the system. So we could literally increase our current inflows by 50%, whether that's through residential or commercial growth, still only take that plant to 80%. So, and unfortunately, there was no financial analysis provided for the sewer side of it. It was just here's a number, but obviously it was based on some sort of where are we trying to get to, and our argument is. We're certainly willing to pay, if there's a fee necessary in order for these facilities to keep up with the projected growth, then that's one thing. If the capacity exists, and the reality is, I think we all understand, we're not going to increase, we're not going to increase our input by 50% over the next 5 years, and that's where it ties back into the water side. You're talking about for the purposes of the analysis, you're talking about a 20% increase in the system, 20% increase in demand in the system over the next 5 years, and relating that to a 5-year CIP. Again, let's look at what's the reality of the potential impacts to the system over the next 5 to 10 years, and what is the existing capacity that already exists in those systems. So I hope that makes sense, but we're using hypothetical dollars to come up with a number instead of looking at capacity and how far that gets us in today's market.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. West, if I might. Is there a number, no matter how small, that you could live with?
Oh, I think it's something that, like I say, from an economic development perspective standpoint, I think it's something that we all understand we need to get to a point. We're not asking, we're not asking the city to take on, a ridiculous burden here. I think it's something that if we could work towards something that makes sense, if we can work towards, again, a number that we can get our brain around from a numbers perspective, and it's something that we can phase in so that folks can get used to it. I think it's something that makes sense. Unfortunately, I've been doing this for a lot of years and engaged with a lot of municipalities, and the interesting thing is when you see the chart about, well, how we compare with everyone else, unfortunately everybody does that, and what it ends up doing is, at some point you end up with a race to the top, right? Everybody just keeps raising the bar and saying, well, see, we're not as bad as those guys, and then they say, well, we need to keep up with the next guy. So I really don't like and it would have been interesting to actually have one set of jurisdictions for the purposes of evaluating water and sewer, because for some reason the jurisdictions switched when we went from water to sewer. So I don't like those analysis. I'm a numbers guy. I worked with Mike for a lot of years, and from the engineering side, you want to play with numbers. So for me, it's what's the capacity, how far can we get with that capacity, and then let's look at how we fund going forward from there.
Anybody else on the committee have a question?
No question.
Okay. More public comment?
Thanks again, Madam Chair. Again, Mark Turner for the record. I guess one of the questions that we need to answer is, due to the fact that it appears that there is adequate capacity in these systems at this time, what happens if we don't implement this right away? It's good that this discussion is taking place. It indicates that there's planning and thought about the future. But what if these fees are not implemented until it appears to us that we may begin to start to need them? And I'd like someone to answer that question. Along with that, I think that everybody here knows that there has not been any affordable housing constructed in Carson City in quite some time. And I think there is a need for that. A lot of that is driven by land costs. Our land costs here are not cheap, but there are some pockets within the city where there's an opportunity to try to create some lower cost housing. And if we get any assistance from the legislature in construction defect litigation, I think that you'll see people be more willing to take some chances on developing entry-level housing, starter housing that is affordable to people who are making the leap from rental housing or an apartment to actually owning a piece of real estate. So first off, if there could be some discussion about what would happen if we didn't implement this at this point in time. And then just to echo Aaron's comments a little bit, if this is something that does become a reality, I think that it would be very important to adopt a phased approach to this with a period of time saying, hey, look, starting a year from now, this is going to ramp up from this time and give people the opportunity to prepare and shift their business models to incorporate this if that is something that must be. Thank you.
If you recall, when we brought this recommendation first to the board a year ago, I think it was, that they look at raising the hookup fees. We said not right away. We said we know there are subdivisions just getting started. People are just beginning. We don't feel like just because somebody's broken ground, we need to hit them with a higher hookup fee. I think that was what we said at the time. Is there any other public comment? All right, committee?
I think Mark had raised a question that perhaps staff can address with regard to the need for capacity in terms of these capacity fee condition, or changes that are being discussed?
Thank you. You know, a couple questions came up there, and one of the things that we did here is we looked at different options, you know, obviously, and how to do different calculations. We updated works and circs. We looked at different options. We do have a recommendation, and part of our recommendation is that we implement this in a phased approach. You know, some of the ideas that we had discussed would be a 3-year phased approach, say like 20% the first year, 40% the following year, and then the remainder, 60% the third year. So, and this wouldn't take effect until obviously the following year. By the time we go through the process, Board of Supervisors, if they approved it, you know, there'd be a process we have to go through even to do that. So the phased approach is definitely consideration. If some of the comments was that, you know, what do we do with these charges? And part of it is we can pay down some of our debt, can get lower rates. There's some advantages to doing it now with this system. Any other questions?
So there's advantages to doing it now, but if we gave everybody fair warning and started it in 6 months to a year, that would not be detrimental?
Well, I mean, I don't know about detrimental, but it would start funding the system, you know, because there's the current capacity charge and the future capacity charge. So what it would take into effect is the new businesses that come in would pay their share of the existing capacity. And, you know, without doing any subsidies, it would be implemented right away. But we understand that, you know, there are tough building times right now, so that's why the proposed option of a 3-year, say, phased-in approach, starting, you know, low instead of doing, you know, like a 20 or 40, 60%, doing it lower to stimulate, to help to recognize some of the growth.
What if we did a 5-year, just as we're doing with the residents, and kept it equal? I mean, where we would start at 15%, which is what we're charging the residents, rather than at the 20%. And did a phase-in over 5 years. I do agree to a certain extent about the competitive edge and the fact that we want these businesses to come here, and that is an important competitive edge in having these lower fees than the surrounding areas, it seems to me.
The number of years, of course, is a policy decision. And, you know, that's a policy decision. As far as a competitive edge, you know, when you do look at the rates that we're charging, you know, I think the rates that Carson is proposing is charging are actually based on our system costs, and we feel those are still very competitive. If, you know, if a business comes in to a different area, they're going to have to pay the other area's connection charges.
I don't think you know, we could phase this in over 20 years. We could delay it and not start for 10 years. But what happens as time continues to tick by with these low rates and no additional revenue come in, the risk starts going up of not being able to meet our demand and to meet the cost of infrastructure. I can't sit here before you and qualify year by year what that might be. But if, for instance, these rates stay where they are now for the next 5 years, and we have some big developments come in, both commercial and residential, some sizable ones, I can tell you that we will be back saying we have to raise the rates to all users, because we're not making these numbers up. We have a demand to do it. So, but I think it comes down to risk is the longer you push this off into the future, that higher the risk is that you're not going to be able to meet your demands. So no, it doesn't need to happen today or tomorrow, but we need to be starting to think about this.
And I wasn't inferring that we should wait 5 years. That was never my thought.
Madam Chair, if I may, while I certainly recognize what Mr. West and Mr. Turner are talking about and their concern of basically increasing the rates 9 times or something along those lines, honestly, I believe a phased approach is beyond the purview of what this committee is for. That is a policy decision. That's my opinion. I think what our charge is to see if the way this calculation is presented is fair, meets the intent of the city's finance code, and and let the Board of Supervisors decide how and when they want to implement it.
Well, actually, we've been asked to make a recommendation on that to the Board of Supervisors, so, and any recommendation we make can be thrown out the window by the Board of Supervisors, and they can certainly do something entirely different, and,
Yeah, and really what we'd like today is to get a direction on your thoughts on how we did the computation. There was 3 different ways as to what makes the most sense in your opinion. And then we also would like to get just some feedback as to what you think as to moving forward. What would your recommendation be to the Board of Supervisors in terms of starting this? And if we did start it, what would your recommendation be in terms of phasing it in over time or not? So that's really the goal out of this item.
Yeah, just, I guess, a few thoughts. I personally am comfortable with the recommendations from the FCS group. They were the basis for the residential monthly charges that have been implemented, and we're now in the midst of the graduated rate increase. So from that perspective, I'm comfortable with their recommendations, assuming that staff is comfortable with those as well. I think it's really important to have a roadmap for everybody. You can't plan projects a year or 2 ahead if you don't know what your costs are going to be. I think we've got to have a fairly extended but defined program or timetable for looking at these connection fee adjustments. I do think there's some value, and I think the other half, if you will, of the revenue side of our utilities does benefit, as Mr. Turner said, from new customers. You know, they're ratepayers the month they start paying their first bill. And there's a value to that, in my mind. The tax base increase, there's a value to that. And so I don't know that 1-to-1 is the ratio that I would pick for the absolute number of what the connection fee should be versus, some other maybe lesser adjustment, but recognition that frankly, at this point, the ratepayers on the monthly bill are subsidizing the connection fees that aren't being paid. And so I think, as I would see it, I would like to have us discuss the idea of maybe bringing that into a better balance. I'm not convinced that my personal sense is the levels that are here in terms of connection fees, but I think they represent a basis on which we can have some discussion, and they certainly have a basis in the way they've been developed, particularly on the water side. I think the sewer side, as Mr. West said, there's a little less detail at this point. So for what it's worth, to start the discussion.
okay, first we had somebody else in the audience that wanted to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jeff Kale. I am a member of the Board of Directors of Builders Alliance, and I am a local lender here in town. And I'm a Carson City resident, born and raised, so been around a little while. I have a couple of questions just specifically in regards to a comment that was made about connection fees allowing discounts on existing rates. I, as a consumer of water in Carson City, have seen our rates increase substantially, seen it on my bill. Just doing the math, I believe the connection rate for a consumer residential home was $3,700 for the fee for each household that's connected. Is that correct? If you were to cut my bill increased from, we'll just use I got a daughter who likes to take a shower a lot, use a lot of water to do her hair. Let's say my bill is $50. My bill is now running close to $100. So I've had a $50 increase. If you were to take these connection fees and reduce my bill by $30 a month, with the connection fee that the builder is paying, that's going to be passed on to the consumer The builder is not going to pay that. That's going to go in the price of the home. That's going to take me 10 years, 5 months to realize that savings on my bill. Now, from the connection fees and the issues and the capacities that we talk about with the water, I cannot see my bill being decreased $30 a month through connection fees that are being supplemented by a business that's coming in. Also, to add on to what Mr. Turner said about single-family residents, we do have a significant gap in affordable housing in Carson City. And from a fixed income point of view, any additional fee that goes on to the purchase or building of a home affects a qualification standpoint for a client. $5,000 when you're talking about a $500,000 home, when you're in that income bracket and you can afford that, that is not a huge deal. When you're talking about someone who makes $25,000 a year that's looking to possibly purchase a home for $130,000, and we're adding on that connection fee through the builder that's going to be passed on to the buyer, that's an issue. So this not only affects the potential commercial businesses that are coming into the area, it also affects the consumer residential that comes into the ground level as a resident of Carson City. I had one other point, and I wish I would have had a pen. I put it on my iPhone. Tribute there, Mark. I apologize, I made a note here. I also I was curious about, you talked about the usage of 425 units per single-family residence, and we had different figures that were disclosed as far as multifamily. I didn't see I saw commercial users that were lumped into other and calculated at 425. My question was, what's the overall percentage of commercial versus consumer residential? And you can lump together multifamily, but from a commercial, are we talking 50%? Commercial businesses are using 50% of the water usage? Or are they using 20% and consumer residential is using 80%? Because if that's the case, how can we tax? How can we ask for a connection fee from a business that's only using 20% when consumer residential as a whole is using a larger portion of that? Do we have that figure? I didn't see it in the slide, so I apologize if I missed it. Yeah, here.
So that calculation.
Excuse me, Krista, would you give your name again for the record,
I'm sorry,
please?
Krista Shirley, FCS Group. My apologies. The 425 gallons per day figure was calculated as an equivalent residential value. So when you're calculating commercial or industrial other than residential, it would be based on the estimated use of that connection. So if the commercial development would be estimated to use 80% of that, they would pay 80% of that. If they were estimated to use 2.5 times that, they would pay 2.5 times that. The 425 is defined as the equivalent of one residential that would then be applied to their estimated use. Is that?
Kind of. Sorry, Jeff Kale again for the record. I guess my question is to quantify it for a simple math guy. If we have 1 million gallons that are being used on a daily basis, what percentage is commercial? Are we talking 500 or 50,000 gallons that are used on the day, and the other 950,000 gallons are being used by residential? That would be my question. I'm just kind of curious on that.
I have some of that data. It'll just take me a little bit to look up, so continue on and I'll try and pull it up.
And then one other question that I had is, it looked like, just from the presentation, it looked like we had a meter issue. The issue being that we have meters that are, if I understand the presentation correctly, again, I'm not a water expert, but we have a certain amount of water that's flowing through certain connections, and depending on the connection that you have, that creates a conservation of the water usage. So I think that's the other thing that needs to be addressed as far as future usage. What are we going to do that's going to implement into make sure that we have conservation efforts on the amount of the water that obviously needs to service whatever residence or commercial building that is there? But what can we do? Do we have the right meter?
Would anybody like to address that?
I don't understand your last question. I'm sorry.
Well, if I understand the presentation correctly, we had a variance in the scenarios that were presented by the list of commercial businesses from the restaurants to the multifamilies. There were meter sizes that were presented, and depending on the size of the meter could dictate how much usage was used. So there were certain instances where I believe, I have to look at, yeah, there it is right there, thank you. So you have some variances between, you have a 1-inch meter versus a 2-inch meter, and the 2-inch meter you can have you have 3,700 in daily use with a resulting charge of $32,849, and then you have a 2-inch meter that's 1,767. So there is a variance in the usage, but percentage-wise it's not as large. You have 15,864. So is there something from a meter size that would help conserve more water on the usage end? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the meters, what you need to understand is for instance, those 3 restaurants, they all have 3 different meter sizes, right? Even though it's 3 restaurants. But that meter size is based on the expected or the estimated use of water for that establishment, depending on how many sinks they have, how many toilets, et cetera. So that meter size is put in based on what the estimated use is. So we don't control conservation just by, that.
That makes sense. Yeah. That was just some clarification I needed. So, and then I don't know if you had that number.
Yeah, she had some of the statistics. So we've got multiple categories, leaving federal, municipal in other, and just looking at commercial. Commercial by itself, on an average over the course of the year, is about 17% of the water usage from a water side. So that includes irrigation and stuff. We don't have the sewer numbers split out. This was just the water one. But the residential is about 3 times that. So residential's 60%. 60%.
And that was my question that I think the committee needs to take into consideration. If we are going to ask businesses to pay your fair share for the usage that you're putting in and bringing into this community, we are absorbing a large amount of the cost as consumers, from a consumer residential standpoint. I, as a homeowner, am already paying higher on that rate, and now we're asking for additional connection fees from those businesses to supplement for possible rate breaks, but you're only using 17% of the system when you're already paying for all the infrastructure to come in. It just doesn't, I would ask that you just take it in consideration. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we're asking them to potentially pay connection fees all the way up to, $495,000, I think is what I saw, or it was $395,000. That's a huge economic development impact on our city. And being here as a long-term resident, I have seen building going on in Douglas County that is not going on in Carson City, and that tax revenue not coming in, and everything going just over the border. So, thank you.
I will remind everybody of one thing, that one of the reasons why the residential rates went up so high was because for years the residential rates were abnormally low, and they were being subsidized by businesses in the commercial. I believe I have that correct? Yes. Okay. All right, committee. I think Bruce made an excellent suggestion about a discussion, and I see he's got his pen out. So would you like, I'm sorry, yes?
Based on the conversations that take place, could I just throw one more thing in there? And I appreciate you. For the record, Aaron West. So I guess I truly appreciate the conversation, the tone of the conversation as it relates to ramping up and what that looks like. I'm a little concerned that we're not having more of a conversation about the numbers because, and again, I understand I'm coming into this late, I wasn't here for the rate discussion, but as it relates to, there's no financial support for the number that was provided for the sewer side. And when we're talking about existing capacity, so even if you used 4% growth rate, which is aggressive, we would literally have over 16 years worth of growth at 4% in the community to even get to the current, to use the current capacity that's in the sewer plant. So I think you could really help us out by giving us an opportunity to look deeper into the numbers to see how are we getting to this. I truly appreciate the idea that you guys want to ramp it up, but let's ramp it up to something that actually makes sense. And at this point, we just haven't seen the numbers to be able to make sense.
I understand your feeling. You know, some of this is because our wastewater treatment plant is falling apart and may have capacity, but it doesn't have healthy capacity, I guess would be the way I'd put it. Would you put it that way, Dave?
You have to be careful because it has to be new capacity.
Well, but I want to point out again, connection charges, there's existing capacity, there's an element of existing capacity. And any time that we don't bring in those full rates to support that, when that equipment, that existing capacity needs repair and rehabilitation, there's a cost associated with that. And these existing connection charges, which are well-founded in the science. I mean, what we've created here, our approach and, you know, how we decided what a work and circ is, I mean, these are industry standard calculations. So it isn't something unusual that we're doing. We didn't present great detail because we didn't want to get into the details of it. But anything that we bring in as far as a connection charge goes, you know, will help in the future costs of the repair and rehabilitation of the existing plant.
Does that help?
Not really, because we're talking about repair of existing facilities, and as the conversation has taken place, connection fees are supposed to only be for expansion of facilities to meet those needs. Well, and this is where we get into the methodology, right? I would submit to you that from a developer perspective, the idea behind that is because the reality is we don't have any control over the existing system costs. And so your customer base actually probably decreased over the last 5 years, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your system costs decreased. They could have gone up. And you're actually transferring a disproportionate share of that burden into the impact fee, which now the developer's paying. So this is the conversation we've had in multiple jurisdictions. From an impact fee perspective, is it true growth of the system to feed the growth that's necessary for the development that's taking place? But as you point out, as you get into the minutia of this, really there is a large element of those dollars that are going back to subsidize repairs on the systems that are, you know, technically should be the responsibility of the ratepayer. So.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I need help from staff here. Isn't an element of the existing system excess capacity, and didn't somebody pay for that excess capacity?
Can we, Karen Johnson, FCS Group. So part of the methodology here, and maybe one clarification, there is a difference between an impact fee and a connection charges. What we're doing here are connection charges and not impact fees. There is no requirement that a connection charge just be based on future capital and future growth. That is one methodology. So at the beginning of this process, just to give a little bit of background, we did review several different approaches to developing connection charges, one of which is just looking at, so in the industry there are kind of three main approaches, and I think this just might help with the differentiation between impact fees and connection charges. You can develop the fee just on the existing cost basis if you chose to. Take your existing system, divide it by your existing customer base, and you have a charge, and that you would apply that to your new customer growth. It's called system buy-in. That means everyone's just getting on par, paying their share of the existing system. On the other spectrum, and that gives you the lowest charge because it's not including any of your future capital. On the higher end of that spectrum is where we're just looking at the incremental future cost, which is closer to what you're referring to as an impact fee, where you're just taking your future capital costs that are expansion related and dividing it by just your incremental growth. That gives you a higher charge. So that is a valid approach. You could certainly do that, and it would result in a higher charge than what's shown here and be a valid defensible approach as well. So there's kind of three main ways to do it. This approach that we're taking here is kind of like the average embedded approach that we're looking at, where it takes the part of the existing system and the future and then takes the total customer base together, and that gives a more moderate level of an increase rather than just tacking it on to the incremental. So we did go through in the early stages looking at those different approaches, and it was determined that the kind of average approach of taking existing and future was the was the desired approach to come forward. And then what we're showing here is just the denominator scenario differences. But so just a little bit of information is you literally could take that, if we're just looking as an example, the total existing cost basis of 95.5 million, you could divide that by the 23,000 existing customers and come up with a charge. You could take the future projects of 16.7 million and divide it by just that incremental 4480. I can't see that far, but that 44 number, and come up with a higher charge. So those were those approaches. So there is definitely excess capacity in the existing system that we're saying is available, essentially available to serve growth in addition to whatever future projects are added. I hope that maybe just clarifies a little bit long-winded, but hopefully gives a little bit of information that wasn't shared.
I can appreciate the methodology, but again, it comes down to the 16.7 forecasted, the 16.7 million forecasted in the future does not take into account current capacity, and unfortunately we don't have that information to know what that current capacity is. If it's anything like the sewer plant, you've got 16 years of capacity, so I think we could take a very moderate approach. And like I say, unfortunately the numbers weren't provided on the sewer side to determine how we came up to the $4,000 per unit. I understand it's a work or a CERC or whatever that is, but I haven't seen, is it tied to CIP, to a 5-year CIP plan? It's
Just brief answer. Again, it's the same approach as done here, and again, we did not include it on the slide. We do have that information. It can certainly be provided for review. It's the same approach where you're taking the existing cost basis and the future and dividing it by the customer base. So that same type of approach, and we can certainly get that detail. We likely have the detail here if we wanted to take a look at that.
I would just submit that if it's the same approach, a 5-year CIP
Yeah, it's
based
the
on...
same approach.
Okay, based on 16 years of capacity in the current plant, you're probably not adding capacity, you're just maintaining. So is that really, again, going back to is it the responsibility of the ratepayer, or is it the responsibility of the developer to pay for that excess capacity? So I don't want to beat the dead horse, so to speak, but I hope you can appreciate that, we're really just trying to dig into the numbers. We're just trying to make sure that we appreciate where you guys are going with this. We just want to make sure that the numbers make sense at the end of the day.
And I understand, and I hope you understand that this committee really hopes that we can come up with something that we all agree to, that, it's clearly, this committee is not having fun with this, all right? So, it's by necessity. So that's one reason we wanted to be sure you were here. Okay. Bruce?
I don't have much to add. I do think, in response to one of the comments regarding low-cost housing, that the city has other avenues to grant favorable connection fees or make some sort of a rate structure that might accommodate the low-cost housing question. I certainly understand how that can have a huge impact. If you have $8,000 between water and sewer and a $100,000 unit, that's a lot of money as opposed to $1,000. So I understand that, but I think that can be dealt with in different ways rather than the overall rate structure.
Well, let me put it this way to the committee. First of all, I think we need to decide if we agree that we want to reach that $3,700 figure, and if so, how do we want to get there? What would we recommend for a starting number, and when should it go into effect? I think that might be the questions we're looking at. To which I'm hearing no answers.
Well, you looked at me very hard, Madam Chairman. I guess in my mind at this point in time, I understand the basis for the $3,700. I have some reservations about locking onto that as a number. I don't know how to justify a different number other than the board has the right to make that decision. I do feel we should begin the implementation of an increase in the connection fee. I was looking at numbers just by way of anticipating where things, conceivably might go, or how somebody might implement this, and I came up with you would be somewhere, if you did it over a 5 or 6 to 8 year period, you could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,200 to $3,600 per connection if you simply increased it $450 a year for a 7 or 8 year period. So you could get there with that kind of a math approach if you wanted to. That would be programmable to a builder that would phase it in over a long time. We've got to understand we're digging a hole while we're trying to begin to offset that with connection fees. We're still going backwards for a while, but that would be, at least for frame of reference, that would be a way we might start some further discussion here, Madam Chair.
Okay, I like the idea of the 6 to 8 year period phase in. I myself was thinking that we shouldn't start any higher than a 15% increase, which is what the public is paying. And that also gives us time on an annual basis to take a look at it and see if we need to raise it higher because everything's booming again, or whether we need to say, wait a minute, we're having another recession. We might want to hold off on raising it again. I'm throwing out thoughts, so,
Can I respond to one of your thoughts? The problem I see with a percentage increase is we're starting at something that's 10% of what it was a few years ago. And so I was looking at it, I did look at that and think about that, but I was looking at it as saying, okay, it's $454 this year. Next year, or a year from now, call it $900, and then go to $1,350. And so your numbers are going up percentage-wise. It's a huge increase. It's 100% in 1 year, but it's only $450. And so from the standpoint of getting closer to the projected rate over 7 to 10 years, you just about have to, a $450 increase the first year is 100%. If you did $450 the second year, that's like 67%, and then it lowers year to year. So percentage-wise, to me, in the nature of the way these numbers are sitting now, isn't the way I look at it. I would look at it in more, how do you get it to a more equitable number based on the calculations that we've been provided, as opposed to 15% is $65, and
per house, per hookup.
right.
Madam Chair, since I was incorrect earlier in that we do need to make a recommendation on implementation, I would like, in my opinion, because this would be such a shock to the system and the development community, I would like to postpone it a little bit so they can program it in. But I would also like to see that it is fully implemented, that ramp-up is fully implemented within 5 years, because if I saw in the report, you should be reanalyzed every 5 years. So if we stretch beyond that time period, we're already behind the 8 ball, so to speak, the next time the 5-year cycle comes around. So I guess that's my 2 cents.
Madam Chair?
Yes?
As Darren says, flying a little bit higher, we've got a sewer connection fee proposal, one proposal for sewer connection fees. For water, we've got 2 options. Is that right? Option 3?
3 options. A, B, and C.
Oh, that's right.
It was 3 options, but we ultimately drummed it down to 2 recommendations, but we could go back to the options if you would like to.
I'm good with 2. So really what we're looking at is a recommendation on the methodology at this point, coupled with a recommendation on the implementation, whether it's going to be definitive as to how many years, or a dollar amount per year, or percentage amount per year. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be up to the supervisors.
Correct.
To help me get a sense of the differences between scenario A and scenario B, which, if I understand it correctly, that's recommendation 1 and 2 on that table. I was, in looking at some of these numbers, I was, in going back to Darren's reference to the top 3 customers, restaurant 1, 2, and 3, I didn't see a relationship between the average daily use in gallons per day and the meter size. For example, the highest daily use is from the 1-inch meter. Is there a relationship, or is it, I'm missing something. I thought the higher the meter size, the more flow.
The meters are sized by architects.
There you go.
I believe that was the point, Randy, is the meter size is not a relevant predictor of usage.
I'll make a comment to Danny Rotter. A lot of the times the meter size is for an instantaneous value. If you have a bathroom with 5 urinals that use the flushometer or whatever it's called, that is a higher usage in water versus 2 or 3 tank toilets. And so when you go through the fixture unit counts, depending on the pressure and how far away they are, it's a site-dependent thing that may be on an instantaneous value as opposed to how many customers, how many people go in the bathroom and actually use that on any given day, or how much they irrigate.
Thank you. Is the recommendation for the water connection fee to present 2 options to us?
No, and we wanted to present multiple options so that you could understand that we did look at different things, because we got feedback saying, well, what about this, what about this? So staff's recommendation is what we would use up here is a hybrid approach, that there'd be a meter equivalency charge for all customers through 1-inch except multifamily, and that's based on usage. Multifamily would be the 1-inch meter charge 30% of the 5/8 by number of units. And then the last bullet there is we gave an option, either a work or a GPM, and we felt the GPM option for non-single family customers with 1.5-inch meters and larger, and this is all for the water side. And that would give the city the most flexibility depending on who's coming in and how they use. And the reason we provided information on those tables is, 1, to look at different customers, and 2, to try not to overwhelm with numbers, but to show that there are differences. And I think this approach gave us the best blend of not just using a standard AWWA, which the consultant said that we could do, that is standard in the industry, we could do something like that, but we wanted to give the most flexibility on people who come in and maybe they put in a 2-inch meter because that's their standard size that the company uses, but their max daily flow isn't that high, so they would actually have a lower charge from us. So that was to help simplify our recommendations.
That helps me, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And that did simplify everything, right? Okay. Yes, Mr. West.
Madam Chair, in the interest of collaboration and cooperation, again, for the record, Aaron West, I appreciate the direction you're headed with it. I think, based on the recommendation, I think from an economic development perspective, we like the idea of when you get into an industrial use of actually going by water consumption instead of meter size. I would submit that it would probably encourage some form of on-site recycling, or depending on the manufacturing process or what have you. So I would encourage that. We would support the approach that's being discussed about a 20% per year phase-in over the next 5 years. We would ask that you look at pushing off that implementation date to whether that's a January 1 of 2016, so that we can look at projects that are currently funded. We have plans already in development and into the city for permitting. So there's some things that are already in play here that the financials have already been kind of set in motion. So if we could look at trying to push that off to 2016 and then from there phase in, but that gives it, like you said, gives the ability to then reevaluate on a more consistent level.
I appreciate that very much. I want you to know. Committee, how do you feel about that?
I guess I appreciate very much the comments. I think what I would suggest is that we recommend to the board that it go into effect 12 months after their action, which would in effect put it sometime in the early part of 2016 or maybe a little bit later. A year sounds like a long time, but it's really not when you're playing with the financial people.
And particularly when some projects are already in the planning stages. I think we've all agreed in the past that we didn't want to impact that. Okay, how do you feel about the 20% a year? I know you didn't like percentages, Bruce.
I can probably live with a percentage if that's the consensus. If I understand what's being projected or proposed here, it's 20% of the number it takes to get to where we want to be in 5 years. Is that correct?
Is that what, for the record, Mr. West is nodding.
And he's still awake.
And in the affirmative. So committee, how do you feel about that? Would you feel like a motion to recommend to the board a 20% increase a year over 5 years? Stop me if I'm getting this wrong. To go into effect a year after they would approve or come up with their own solution?
Yeah, the first 20% or the first increment of that increase would be effective 12 months after the board's action with regard to this.
Okay, would somebody like to make that motion?
I'd like to clarify, are we talking about both the water and sewer at this time? Do we need to give direction on the water side first, and then we jump over to the sewer side?
Well, for us, it would be simpler, yeah, so I could itemize it and we could, talk about the water side first and then the sewer side.
So you would want two different motions?
I think that would just clarify it or tie it into one motion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so for clarification purposes then, on the 20%, we would be taking, there would be an increase of 20% of the 3,440 for each year. So that we're going to get 1/5 of that to get up to the 3,440 in 5 years? Is that what you're talking about?
It won't be quite that number because you're starting at 454.
Well,
I would advise
no,
maybe we
the
not.
20% added to the 454 to start.
Okay.
So we can get the 3,440 in 5 years, up to that in 5.
For the sake of simplicity, why don't we take the delta between what is charged today and what the future is going to be and divide it by 5? And that is the increase per year. I see staff nodding, which means I did something right.
You see, Madam Chair, we're getting away from percentages.
I knew you were going to lead me there eventually. Okay, and again, for the record, Mr. West was nodding in the affirmative. Okay, so we want to hear a motion about the water first. And staff, Dave? Or Darren,
I'm sorry.
whichever. Let us know if we need some help on this motion, okay? All right.
Madam Chair, I'll give it a whirl here. I make a motion that we accept option 1, the hybrid approach, with an implementation period over 5 years, starting 1 year after the Board of Supervisors, assuming to accept that approach, with 1/5 of that total increase taking place each year until a total connection charge of $3,763 is reached.
I'll second that motion with a clarification that that connection number is based on an equivalent residential unit. or ERC.
I'll amend my motion for that.
You get that, Kathy? Okay.
Madam Chair, may I just make a comment? Nick was suggesting or saying here,
Well-
and part of that,
We're in the middle of, let me get this and get to discussion, and then we'll do that. All right, so we have a motion and a second by Bruce. Is that correct, Bruce?
Yes.
Okay, now we're at discussion. Staff, do you have a comment?
thank you, sorry. Just that you'd said 12 months after the board action, Finance's recommendation that it would start on July 1, or the beginning of a fiscal period.
July 1, 2016?
Or just,
That is the start of the fiscal year. It would be easier, so.
yes.
That might be more than 12 months, but I agree with Nick that doing it by the start of the fiscal year makes it easier on everybody, I would think. Darren, you have a quixotic look on your face.
Well, if we keep talking about this, we'll get to 8 or 9 years again.
Well, you could start at July 1 of 15.
I got a quick clarification. I was talking with Krista here. The 3440 goes with option 1, not the 3763.
So I think we need to amend the motion.
I'm just going to say that, Madam Chair, as amended to the 3440 rather than try that again.
Okay,
Are we clear then on the July 1? Is that acceptable? Okay, July 1 of 2016.
Second.
all right, and your second includes the correction to the 33?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Kathy, have we totally confused you? Okay, great, you're wonderful, thank you. Okay, any other discussion from the board? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? None, so it passes unanimously. Okay. So now we have the sewer issue. Is the sewer something that all of you feel we need more information on before you can make a motion?
I guess I would ask, I don't see, and maybe I'm missing it here, that there's a specific staff recommendation regarding sewer. Is that the case, or is it somewhere I'm not finding?
So the staff's recommendation is to use the updated sewer equivalent residential charge, which is reflected in this table here.
And revising the CERC to 200 gallons per day.
Right. The CERC has been updated, and that's the footnote there, A at the bottom, where it says a CERC is equivalent to 200 gallons per day.
So David, you're asking for a change in the proposed connection charge and to change the definition of a CERC from 250, I believe, today to 200?
Correct, to use the updated calculation, yes.
Okay.
And what effect will that have? That will enlarge the number for you of the connection charges?
No, it doesn't affect the total number of connection charges. It's more accurate. The CERC is more accurately representing what we're saying each connection contributes to the system. Right now, we're using 250, but in our analysis, we determined 200 is more accurate. So.
Do we have one number for this? I'm looking at this, I'm seeing
Yes,
it.
so basically, the very top line One CERC is equivalent, the proposed charge would be $4,493 per CERC.
Excuse- Mr. West, do you have a recommendation?
Actually, we would stand in support of the previous, the implementation of the water connection fee. Oh, for the record, Aaron West. So, you know, we would be comfortable with the same implementation as the water connection fee. I like the zeros. I was excited about the 3440. The extra $3 on the end of that is really killing me, but.
Okay, committee, how do you feel about that?
Well, I'm prepared to make a motion, Madam Chair. I would move that we implement or recommend to the Board of Supervisors the implementation of a change in the sewer connection fees based on the table, moving to a proposed charge of $4,493 per connection for single-family residents or equivalent over a 5-year period beginning with the implementation on July 1st, 2016, and that we acknowledge the recalculation of the standard equivalent residential connection or amount from 250 gallons a day to 200 gallons per day.
And is there a second?
I will second that, Madam Chair.
All right, Mr. Bennett seconds it. And discussion? Staff comment? Okay, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? No nays. Unanimous.
I really appreciate the participation of the builders group and the builders, and thank you very much.
We appreciate you. Thank you. Listening to us.
I see we have a couple more people in the audience. Again, we have public comment, so if either of you are interested in getting up and saying anything, we're always interested in hearing. Okay. All right. I think that's it. All right. All right, items for our next meeting, we're going to have the budget, right, staff? We're talking about items for the next meeting. So we're going to have the budget and possibly some more information on the potable water issue with that, looking at the budget. Okay. Committee, is there anything else you want to add to the agenda for our March meeting? Silence reigns. Okay. All right, so with that, so do I hear, I asked again, any other public comment, as I must do by law, but okay. So do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Before we do that, I think we have an agenda date for our March meeting, but I'd like to confirm it.
Yes. March 25th.
Yeah, so the meeting would be March 25th at 1 o'clock
Okay.
here in the Sierra Room.
Okay, thank you.
Currently scheduled 1 to 5.
And that's a Tuesday?
That's a Wednesday.
Wednesday? And that's 1 o'clock, not 1:30, right? Okay. All righty, now do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.